and with no basis in fact, no evidence, no charges, no trial, no due process. More than 120,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast were rounded up and imprisoned. And 40 years later, under President Carter, they formed a commission to do an investigation. And I testified at that congressional commission and told them that we are all Americans, and you commissioners are Americans. We are fellow Americans. And it was fear and ignorance that brought about our imprisonment. Pearl Harbor was in Hawaii, and that was bombed. But the Japanese Americans of Hawaii were not imprisoned. Only Japanese Americans on the West Coast. And that's because a third of the population of Hawaii would have to have been extracted. The economy would have collapsed. On the West Coast, where the bombing did not happen, it was greed in part, and you saw that in the neighboring farmer who bought a $20,000 piece of property for $2,000. It was greed and avarice and racism that happened. So this story is very relevant to our times today. That's the lesson that we must take. And my father told me we have to be actively engaged in the process of democracy. Democracy is a very fragile system. It's got shining ideals, but it's a people's democracy, and it's dependent on the people to make those ideals real.
This is sort of a question for all of you, I hope you don't mind. The question is, what goes into creating a piece of musical theatre like this? You know, obviously, George, you've gone from screen to musical theatre, but for all of you, especially like, obviously, you've got to embody George.
Sure, yeah.
How did you guys find the whole process of creating this piece of theatre?
Yeah, I was part of the very early creation of the show, so for many of you that are not familiar with the process of creating a musical, I've been with George on Allegiance for 13 years now. My very first reading of the show was in 2010, but there were actually several developmental readings of that even before 2010 in California with George that were before my time. So as you can see, musicals take a really long time to gestate and develop and change and improve and get better. You know, so 2010 was my very first reading. It would be 2 years of readings and doing developmental workshops and things before we would go and premiere the show at the Old Globe in San Diego, where we ran for 6 weeks. And then it would be another 3 years after that until we got to Broadway in 2015. And now finally London, right? Which I know has been a dream of George and mine to do that here. So musicals take a really long time to get made. And every step of the way, there are many iterations of the show, many changes, many characters that come and go, character names that change. So it's a long and arduous road to get to where we are. So I hope that when all my friends go and see a show on Broadway, on the West End, off West End, wherever that is, that you go, oh right, like probably what I'm seeing right now is years of blood, sweat, and tears that went into making this thing.
Following on from that, has it been a different show in London, in the feeling or in the experience of doing it compared to doing it in the States?
Oh, well, compared to the States, I'll start and then I'll let George take it too. But for me, the show is radically different. When we premiered the show on Broadway in 2015, we were at the Longacre Theatre. It's an 1,100 seat house. You know, very traditional sort of Broadway house that's actually traditionally, most of the time plays are in that house. So there's a teeny tiny orchestra pit. We had a conductor that was in front of us, not behind us. And he was up and above us, right? And we had a proscenium stage where all the audience was all on one side and we were all on the other. So a very sort of traditional theater going experience. And a large house. Here, this is such an intimate experience that we all get to have in a setup that I've only worked in the first time called the Traverse, where there's audience on two sides. I also think that we are different artists 7 years later, and that the audience, you are all different, right? Like, think about everything that's happened between 2015 and now. Like, think about that, you know, the world leaders that we've all endured, you know, the pandemics we've all gone through.
Yeah.
And also, but most importantly, the different conversations and the different ways we're talking about racism and systemic racism. So, and I think because of that, we are better artists. The audience is a smarter, more compassionate audience. And the show feels very, very different. Even though it's the same words, same lyrics, you know, same plot. And yet it is to me, it resonates as a completely different show here. Yeah.
For me and Mass were only in this is the first time we've done this production. So the London production, we had a month?
Yeah.
A month to rehearse. Whereas I think in Broadway they had a lot more because you had scenes that came and gone and was rewriting the next day and
in San Diego too.
Yeah, so this one was quite intense, and also we had Christmas week as well. So it initially was like 3.5 weeks. So it was a lot of trying to get into character so quickly and trying to find. I mean, for me anyway, my character. It was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to take in 3 weeks, but we managed to do it, obviously, with you guys' help, with your help as well. But this one was a lot quicker than I'm sure a normal musical would be. Usually it's 6 weeks rehearsal for a new musical. This was, I feel like, half.
Yeah, you're the same, right?
Yes, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, excuse my English. I'm Japanese. I was born in Hiroshima, and then my family have a different story to this story. But still, I feel something about the event that happened in the United States, and then also another side of the pond in Hiroshima. So getting into the character, I just be myself, and then I usually do a character acting or more comedy acting, but for this I just be myself.
Quite nasty. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
And I must say, Telly and I are the only Americans in this cast. We were working with British Asian actors from all over Asia, from Singapore, from the Philippines, from Japan, and extraordinarily talented. And we are so blessed to have been able to work with them. Didn't she sound American?
Yeah.
And her Japanese is perfect too when she spoke Japanese.
I was practicing that for a while.
But you know, I always wonder when I talk in Japanese to the other actors, they don't understand Japanese, and so I see that slight. So I explain to them what I'm saying so that they can have, like when I was congratulating Keiko on the proposal that she got from Frankie, and when we first rehearsed it, I saw that kind of confused. What is he saying to me? But I really am enjoying this production and the intimacy. To be able to literally hear your sobs. Because you got, I mean, when we're on that train traveling, we're looking right at your faces, and it's such a weird feeling. And also, at the same time, it's a discipline to see through you, despite the fact that you're inches from us. I see the desert of Arizona and New Mexico, and we were in Texas forever and a day. It's such a huge state. And it was all dry all the way. And suddenly, overnight, we saw greenery. We were in the swamps of Arkansas. And for this Southern Californian, the swamps were magical. huge giant trees rising up out of the black muck, and their roots came out and snaked back in and out and in and out. And for me, 5 years old, and my brother Henry, 4 years old, it was really an adventure of discovery, where for my parents, it was a devastating, anguishing experience, having lost everything. The government took their bank account, our home. I mean, we couldn't pay for the mortgage, so the bank took over the house. All the kind of outrage that you saw here. The neighbor buying a $20,000 piece of property with the car and tractor and everything involved. So I wanted to, I felt in a book, I've got a book that's out now called They Called Us Enemy, and I wanted to share that dual level of experience. For my parents, it was devastating and embittering and enraging and humiliating. And for us, the kids, it was an adventure of discovery. And that was the human experience that I went through. As a teenager, much after the camp, I had many discussions with my father. And I was blessed by having a father who was not embittered, as so many people were. He wanted his children to be active participants in a democracy. And so he urged all of us, all three of us, my baby sister as well, to be involved in society. And so that made me an activist in so many social justice issues. And I hope some of that came out from this, particularly in the characters of the adults here.
George, congratulations on such an amazing performance. Thank you for that. If you'll indulge me, 2 questions. George, like musical theatre, Star Trek often has a large LGBT fan base, and I want to know your thoughts on why that might be. And for the rest of the cast, my husband is playing flute for the production. How's he doing?
Yeah. We love Jayne. First of all, can I just say, first of all, Jayne is unbelievable. A round of applause for Jayne back there, who is doubling so many instruments. How many instruments are you playing every night? 7. I can barely play 1. So bravo.
I love this rumble. Right under the trains. It's life continuing on as we're having this discussion.
But the second part of the question was about the LGBTQ connection, correct? Like, and why and how that many LGBT, that Star Trek and musical theater both have a very huge LGBTQ community connection to it. Why do you think that is, George?
Well, Star Trek was born out of Gene Roddenberry's vision in the 60s. It was a turbulent time. The civil rights movement was going on. African Americans demonstrating peacefully for equality, and law enforcement officers were assaulting them with attack dogs and fire hoses. We had a war going on in Southeast Asia, and that war in far-off Southeast Asia was dividing the United States. We had the peace movement, and we had those that supported the war. I was by that time I was a professional actor in Hollywood, and I joined a group called EIPJ, Entertainment Industry for Peace and Justice, and worked with people like Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland. And we organized rallies. But Jayne was concerned because here was this war in Southeast Asia, And at the rallies that we had only a sprinkling of Asian faces. And she asked me, why don't we have more Asians? And I had to tell her that Asians are very, very visible. And because we Japanese Americans were visible and looked just like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor, we were punished with no evidence, no charges, no reason other than the country was in a racist hysteria. And Asians don't like to be targeted. There's this saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And at a intense emotional peace rally, Asians don't like to be visible. And so I told her that Asians are very concerned about peace in Southeast Asia. But if we can find a way of having a rally that was safe in a indoor protected space, and I said something like the downtown Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles might be a place that would attract Asians. And but it's very expensive. And then Jayne said, how much do you think that'll cost? I told her what I thought it would. And she immediately wrote a check for that. She made that, what we call Peace Sunday, viable. She's an extraordinary woman, courageous woman, and she was gracious enough to not take a star role. She said, I won't speak, I'll read a poem. And we talked to Trans Nguyen, who's half Vietnamese, and she chose to read a poem as well. I knew a congressman from Hawaii, a Japanese American, and a veteran of the 442nd, the heroic group that you saw portrayed on stage here. He was a Purple Heart person and had many honors, and he eventually became a U.S. Senator. But at the time we were planning Peace Sunday, he was a congressman, and we asked him to be the keynote speaker. And we had a packed Biltmore Bowl. So I proved to Jayne and others that Asians were concerned, but because of our visibility and how we get targeted, we're reluctant to be out in the park or out on a plaza or out on the streets demonstrating. So I am an activist because of my childhood imprisonment, and I feel that I have a responsibility. And on the LGBT issue, Star Trek was born in the 1960s. At a time like that, I talked to Gene Roddenberry. I said, we're dealing with all these issues of the time, except for the LGBTQ community. And why is that? Shouldn't we try to deal with that issue? And Gene pointed out, we had one episode where white Captain Kirk kissed black Uhura, a black-white kiss on television. The American South, the local stations refused to air it, and our ratings went to the rock bottom. And so he said, I'm walking a tightrope. We're dealing with a lot of political issues by using a metaphor, putting it in the 23rd century, putting it on a starship instead of Starship Earth, and using metaphors to deal with that issue. And if we are that rooted in the reality of the 1960s, we'll be canceled. And as a closeted gay man at that time, I understood that. I was not I didn't come out until I was very, very late in my life, at 68 years old. But when I did come out, I came out roaring. Let me tell you about that. It was in 2005. Those activists that were involved in getting equality for the LGBT community had been making slow but steady progress. In 2003, Massachusetts had marriage equality, the first state in the United States. And they got that through the judicial route, through the courts. On the West Coast, in California, the people's representatives, both houses of our legislature, passed a marriage equality bill. It was a landmark event. We would have been the bookends of America, Massachusetts and California. That bill that passed both houses of our legislature needed one more signature, that of the governor, who happened to be a movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Those of you that, I see the smiling faces.
Yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. He is a Republican that finds his base on the right wing. And he played to his, when he campaigned for the governor's office, he campaigned by saying, "I'm from Hollywood, I've worked with gays and lesbians, some of my friends are." And with that rhetoric, some of my gay friends did vote for Schwarzenegger. But he is a hypocrite. He will never be elected in California because when the bill landed on his desk, he vetoed it. And I was so angry that I was ready to jettison my career. And I came out roaring and blasted Schwarzenegger's veto. And I discovered that I was prepared to have my career fade away. Instead, I was getting more guest shots on television as gay George Takei. William Grace. I have a tendency to be Geralt, and I talk too long.
So yeah, we have only have time. So I think there's probably time for one more short question. Has anybody got your question up on the balcony?
And short answer.
And a short answer. There's one person in the hand there. You're the last one.
It's a very brief question, and it's also a very shallow one compared to the other ones. Which song is the most difficult to get right during rehearsals?
One more time?
Which song is the most difficult to get right during rehearsals?
Which song was the most difficult to get right?
During rehearsals.
What? That's a great question. I'm gonna say, I always think "Do Not Fight the Storm" is really hard to do. And because it's the number after opening, and there's so much that happens in a short amount of time. For us, it's storytelling told through musical theater and done in a way where it requires that we, it's compressed, right? So from the moment Pearl Harbor happens to the moment that we all end up at Heart Mountain, that's one number, one musical number, and so much has to happen musically and staging-wise and choreographically that, you know, it's that was, I think, tricky to get right. And David, our CSM, is nodding yes.
Yeah. Musically and in terms of substance, I think it's Keiko's higher, aspiring, always aspiring. We begin with Wishes on the Wind, and here she is in a prison camp, and a woman, and that is a factor in the 40s, and that song is so soaringly beautiful, and sings it so beautifully. I'm off stage. She should be here. Yeah.
She should, yeah. I think for us, it's so many harmonies. There's the most harmonies I've ever sung in a show. And I'm an alto in this one, which I get all the really boring lines. And it's the nice higher ones. I get all the alto lines. So for me, it's like Itetsu Itai, you know, where you see the big light come on us and we're looking at the bomb. That was a hard one to get together, to get the harmonies right. That one for me.
Yes, it is difficult to get harmony right because I think this piece is the style of composition is more like an opera, more than Phantom the Opera or more than the classical musical. So, but for me, most difficult song was Get in the Game.
Yeah.
Even though I don't dance in this musical, but it was so worthy and fast to me. That was the one difficult one for me.
Great question.
Brilliant question to finish with. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. A nice big round of applause for